People should read the history of how Germany elected Hitler. Read that history.
We pledge to you that we will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
You ought to understand how an unbelievably educated, advanced society can elect a demagogue and how bad it can get as a result.
It's Ken Harbaugh with the Midas Touch Network. I wanted to open with that observation from Seth Moulton, a U.S. Marine turned member of Congress, because that was 9 years ago when people like Seth were ridiculed for making that comparison. Today, we are seeing those warnings made manifest with the illegal deportations, the weaponization of the FBI, the politicization of the military, the list goes on. Congressman Moulton got it right 9 years ago and says that as alarmed as he was then, the danger today is exponentially greater. American democracy is on a knife's edge. As uprisings continue to erupt across the nation, I asked Seth to tell us where he thinks things stand. Here's part one of our conversation. Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. My guest today is Congressman Seth Moulton, who has represented the Massachusetts 6th Congressional District since 2015. He helped usher in a new wave of veterans into Congress and has continued to be a leader among them. Seth, welcome to the show.
It's great to be back, Ken. Thanks for having me.
It's hard to believe we are still less than 100 days into Trump's second term. Is it worse than you thought it would be? Is it better than you thought it would be? Which it might be, because you were one of the first people to really raise the alarm about his fascist tendencies. How would you assess the situation?
Yeah, literally the first in Congress back in 2015. I got in a huge bunch of hot water for that, for making the comparisons to the rise of the Third Reich. And then, of course, many others have come out and said that the check boxes of autocracy here that the Trump administration is hitting day after day are pretty amazing if you've read any of this history. Now, the question I often get is phrased this way, is basically the same question you just asked, Ken, which is, is it as bad as it seems? And every single day in the first administration, the answer to that question was no, it's not as bad as it seems. It's far worse. Because if you know people on the inside, you know people who are working in the White House just trying to keep the ship of state on track, keep it from capsizing, they'll tell you it's way worse. It's way worse behind the scenes. In the second Trump term, it's even worse than the first. And we don't have those people. I don't have friends in the White House because all of those people have been purged. The only people working for Trump today are sycophants, loyalists. It only matters if you're loyal. It doesn't matter if you follow the law. It doesn't matter if you're competent. It doesn't matter if you have experience. All he wants are people who are going to suck up to him, just like the vice president demonstrates every single day. A total sycophant who's abandoned all of his principles from his prior life as a Marine, from his book writing career, from his prior life as an elected official, when he very clearly criticized Trump in some of the same terms I've used, and now he's just a lapdog.
Is the military at all insulated from those purges? How worried should we be about that same drive to enforce ideological purity that you see in the other instruments of power? How worried should we be about that taking over the military as well? Because that's a real red line.
We should be very worried because the Trump administration is making a concerted effort to do exactly that. The Secretary of Defense, the most unqualified Secretary of Defense in the nation's history, has made a career of politicizing the military. He wrote a book about how to politicize the military. So contrary to the talking points where they say, oh, it was politicized before, we're bringing back accountability, nothing could be further from the truth. This is what autocrats often do. Their rhetoric is exactly the opposite of what they're actually doing to try to throw people off and distract them. This is the Secretary of Defense who, when he was sworn in, said accountability is back. That was his quote. Accountability is back, but not when it applies to him, because he can grossly violate the law, break every rule of the handling for the handling of classified information, every rule that privates not only know, but are put in prison for violating. But when the Secretary of Defense does it, forget leadership by example, he just lies and gets off scot-free. So this is bad on every level. And while the military is insulated by design, right, the founding fathers were very conscious of making sure we didn't have a king's army. Trump is trying to build that. That's what he's trying to do. He's trying to corrupt the military from top to bottom, and we should be worried about whether he has any success.
I want to roll this clip of you making a statement in the immediate aftermath of the Signal chat story breaking on stage with a whole lineup of members of Congress who I think you can claim a ton of responsibility for bringing into Congress with you. Here you are calling out Pete Hegseth for his hypocrisy and saying accountability is back.
Accountability is back. I quote Secretary Pete Hegseth. That was our Secretary of Defense on the record just a couple of months ago. Now the debate among national security professionals is over whether the Secretary was just incompetent or whether he was drunk. That's how low this has gone. And those are serious debates happening among national security professionals today.
What are you hearing from your friends who are either still in the military or at the Pentagon in civilian roles in DOD about what happens when the Secretary of Defense is not held to the same standard as other people in the department are?
They're very concerned, and incredibly angry. Incredibly angry. I mean, you know this, Ken. Imagine if your commanding officer just didn't follow rules, just grossly violated things that he then tried to enforce on you. I mean, that hypocrisy just doesn't go over well in any organization, but especially an organization where lives are on the line. Because let's be clear. When you put time on target for U.S. military planes over an enemy stronghold out on the internet, where any one of our adversaries might be able to see that information, because that's what they did, okay? That's just inviting those pilots to get shot down. It's incredible that they weren't shot down. That's how dangerous this is. And that's why you have all these means to communicate securely.
Hey, it's Ken Harbaugh. Huge shout out to everyone who has supported this show via our Patreon page. If you want to weigh in with questions for upcoming guests or give us feedback on past guests or make sure you never miss an episode, click the link below. It's free to sign up. And if you're able to pitch in a few bucks a month, just know that we put every dollar back into the show. We do have another reporting trip to Ukraine coming up. Thanks for the help.
My view is that what they were doing by putting this on Signal was not enabling, some faster means of communication. They did it explicitly to violate another law, which is the retention of records.
Yep.
So they violated a law that keeps our troops safe, having flagrant disregard for the safety of the men and women who actually put their lives on the line for the country. And they did it all to violate another law, which is the retention of records. And obviously they're not proud of what they're doing or what they're discussing, which is why they want these records lost to history.
Yeah. I mean, it is the opposite of accountability. They were doing it specifically to avoid accountability. I think that's abundantly clear. I think it's also clear, based on some of the subtext in reading that chat, that this wasn't the first one. It's just the only one.
Oh, no, of course not. Because they do this every day, and they're still doing it.
Yeah.
Of course they're still doing it, because they're getting away with it. Because there's no accountability from the top of the organization on down. There certainly isn't any accountability from President Trump. And listen, lest anyone be listening to this and saying, oh, well, this is some Democrat from Massachusetts, so I guess he's pretty partisan. That's bullshit, because I called out President Biden and said he should fire Secretary Austin when he did something way more minor. He didn't put any lives at risk. He just didn't tell his boss when he was getting surgery. And I mean, he had his reasons for doing that, but they were wrong. I disagree with it. And I was pretty explicit. I was asked, what do you think? What would you do if you were in President Biden's shoes? And I didn't hesitate. I said I would fire him over something way more minor. So there's no accountability with this administration whatsoever.
I'm going to ask you this question as a politician, not as a Marine. When you look at the reaction of Hegseth and his band of fools, doubling down, lying about it, knowing that the evidence is probably a day or two away from being released, what is the thought process that goes into a cover-up like this, which is the worst cover-up in history? I mean, how do you understand their thinking on something like this?
Actually, it's a product of leadership by example, because their boss lies all the time, all day long. And that's the culture of this administration, from the top down, to just lie, to make up numbers, to make up facts, to blame everything on whoever your political enemies of the day happen to be. And so they just adopt that playbook. They adopt that playbook because they see it work for Trump, but more importantly, they just know that that's what their boss expects of them. I mean, really, put yourself back in the Navy and just imagine if every single day you saw your commanding officer lie through his teeth.
Yeah.
You might pick that up at some point.
Yeah. You referenced political enemies. Now those political enemies appear to include graduate students at Tufts University, which is not in your district, but adjacent. My daughter, Katie, goes to Tufts. That whole campus.
Good for her. It's a hard school to get into.
It is, but they are shook up. The whole country is shook up. But seeing the video of that graduate student being dragged off the street by masked and initially unidentified thugs, that might be unfair. I know they were doing their jobs as they were ordered to do them, but
they were doing their jobs as they were ordered to do them. Excuse me, why did they have to wear masks? Like, I'm sorry, if you saw that video on the internet without any caption, you would immediately think, wow, is that Iran or North Korea or China?
You called it Gestapo-like tactics.
Yes. That's what the Gestapo did. That's what they were established to do. Disappear people who disagreed with Hitler.
Yeah. And we see that story repeated again and again now with the flights to El Salvador. Apparently, the administration on one hand is admitting that someone got rolled up in that who didn't deserve to be. The next minute, J.D. Vance is saying that person is a convicted MS-13 member. Back to your point about the reflexive lying. It's just part of their brand. It's part of their strategy.
Yeah, that's right. It's their shtick. And what every American has to realize is that you could be next, right? Like, I mean, sure, you might not think you have much in common with a student from overseas who wears who's a Muslim. You know, you might not see yourself in that image, but you don't know who's coming next, because the bottom line is that the only crime that she committed was disagreeing with the administration. And reminder, folks, we live in the United States of America. The very first amendment to the Constitution, the most important one, is about freedom of speech. And the whole point is you don't always agree. I don't agree with a bunch of the things that this woman said, but I wouldn't imagine, calling up ICE from my office as a congressman and saying, I had this person at town hall recently who disagreed with me. Can you please make her disappear? That's what the Trump administration is doing, and they're reveling in it. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who's the slimiest snake ever to come out of Florida, that's all right.
You got a lot of competition
for DeSantis. Yeah, sorry.
Rubio. Yeah, take your pick.
but that's right.
I'm sorry to throw you off track.
He's just a serpent. But anyway, the point is that they just disappear people who disagree with them. That's what authoritarian regimes do. That's what happens in China. That's what happens in Russia. that is so unbelievably un-American that every American has to be worried. Who's it going to be next?
That was part 1 of my conversation with Seth Moulton. Check out part 2 tomorrow, where Seth talks about the Gestapo-like street tactics of the Trump administration, literally grabbing people who have not been convicted of any crimes off the streets. You don't want to miss this one. See you tomorrow.